Right now, at this dock in San Diego, a 60-foot sport fishing boat is tied up, built in the 1970s. 3 generations of one family have run it, taking regular people out for tuna and whales for about $150 a day. That boat isn't a museum piece, it's a paycheck. And here's the number that changes everything. The average age of California's commercial sport fishing fleet is 45 years old. 350 vessels, nearly 900 engines, a floating collection of classics. California has a set of rules on the books right now that could legally erase almost every one of them within 8 years. Not damage the hobby. Erase it. And 2 days ago, the federal government fired back, landing this fight on the floor of Congress. By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly why, and you'll see the one detail that changes how you see this whole story. The agency behind all of this is called the California Air Resources Board. Most people call it CARB. If you've ever wondered why cars sold in California have different emissions equipment than cars everywhere else, CARB is the reason. It's arguably the most powerful environmental regulator in America, because California is the only state in the country with special permission under federal law to write its own air pollution rules that are stricter than the national standard. For decades, CARB focused on cars and trucks. Then it moved to lawn equipment, generators, trains, ships, and in March of 2022, it turned its full attention to the boats. That month, the CARB board voted to approve a massive expansion of something called the Commercial Hovercraft Regulation. Remember that name? Because depending on where you stand, it's either the villain or the hero of this entire story. Before that vote, the rule mostly covered ferries and tugboats. After it, for the first time in history, it reached commercial passenger fishing vessels, whale-watching boats, dive boats, work boats, pilot boats, research vessels, even certain barges. Basically, if it floats and it works for a living in California waters, it got pulled into the rule book. So, what does the rule book actually demand? Cleaner engines. Much cleaner. Vessels are required to move to the cleanest certified diesel engines available, what the industry calls Tier 3 and Tier 4. On top of that, boats have to install diesel particulate filters, the same soot-trapping devices that come standard on modern trucks. And for some categories, like short-run ferries, the rule went even further and demanded zero emissions entirely. Electric boats, full stop. The first mandate of its kind anywhere in the United States. On paper, that might sound reasonable. Newer engines, cleaner air, better outcomes for everyone. What's the problem? Here's the problem. And this is where the boat owner's side of the story is going to make your jaw drop. When the state studied whether this was actually possible, a report prepared for CARB itself by the California State University Maritime Academy came back with a stunning conclusion. For many of these boats, engines that met the new standards did not exist. Read that again. The state passed a rule requiring equipment that at the time you could not buy at any price. And for the engines that did exist, the report found they were often too big and too heavy for these older hulls, and that cramming them in could destabilize the vessels. We're talking about boats where weight and balance are the difference between coming home and not coming home. Captains were being told to install machinery that their own naval architects said could make their boats unsafe at sea. Then there's the money. If you can't retrofit your old boat, your only option is a new one. A new steel passenger vessel that meets the standards can run north of $5 million. For a family business where the profit margin on a fishing trip is razor thin, that number isn't a hurdle, it's a wall. And here's the truly brutal twist. The moment these rules take full effect, an old non-compliant boat becomes almost worthless inside California. You can't legally run it, so you can't sell it to anyone who wants to run it. The asset these families spent decades paying off evaporates on a schedule set in Sacramento. Industry advocates ran the numbers and concluded that for owners who somehow financed new boats, ticket prices would have to roughly triple. No regular family is paying $500 a head for a day of fishing. The customers disappear. The business dies anyway. Their prediction was blunt. Within 3 to 6 years of the rules biting, most of the fleet would simply be gone. That's why more than 20,000 Californians signed a petition begging the governor to step in. One veteran owner from Bodega Bay put it in a single line. Fishing is already hard work, and soon it would be impossible. Even the state's own Fish and Game Commission warned CARB the rule could backfire. But hold on before you grab your pitchfork. You need to hear the other side of this, because it isn't nothing. In fact, it might be the most uncomfortable fact in this whole video. A sport fishing boat that has already voluntarily upgraded to a relatively modern Tier 2 diesel engine, the good ones, the responsible owners, still pumps out 162 times more diesel soot than a 5-year-old school bus. 162 times. From one boat. Now multiply that across hundreds of vessels idling in harbors, and remember where those harbors sit. Right up against neighborhoods, often lower-income communities, where people breathe that air every single day. Harborcraft rank among the top polluting categories at California seaports. At the massive port complex in San Pedro Bay, these boats were putting out more diesel particulate matter than the trucks. The trucks, at one of the busiest port complexes on Earth. Diesel particulate matter isn't abstract. It's linked to cancer, asthma, heart disease. CARB calculated this regulation would save more than 530 lives in California and reduce pollution exposure for nearly 10 million people. Environmental groups celebrated the vote as a historic win for port communities that have been breathing everyone else's exhaust for generations. So the question this story really asks is genuinely hard. What is a 70-year-old wooden boat worth, measured against the lungs of the kids growing up next to the harbor? Sit with that, because it doesn't have a clean answer. Now, CARB will tell you it didn't just drop the hammer with no mercy, and technically that's true. Compliance deadlines are staggered between 2023 and 2032. Owners who prove financial hardship can apply for extensions to 2034. And in a concession to the sport fishing fleet, boats that installed all Tier 3 engines by the end of 2024 could earn a 10-year extension, buying life until 2035. But look closely at what those extensions actually are. They're not a pardon, they're a stay of execution. Every pathway in that rulebook ends at the same cliff. So how is any of this even legal? Great question, and the answer is the doorway to the biggest twist in this story. Remember how I said California is the only state allowed to write its own air rules? That permission isn't automatic. For each major regulation, California has to ask the Federal Environmental Protection Agency for something called a waiver. No waiver, no enforcement. And the Harborcraft rules journey through Washington has been an absolute roller coaster. The maritime industry begged the EPA to reject it, calling the rule arbitrary and unworkable. Maritime labor unions, the actual mariners working these boats, co-signed letters saying emissions goals can't come at unacceptable risk to the people on the water. There were public hearings, comment periods, legal briefs. Then, in January of 2025, in the final days of the Biden administration, the EPA said yes, mostly. It granted the waiver for most of the regulation, but conspicuously refused to act on two of the most aggressive pieces, including the zero-emission mandate for existing short-run ferries. California, reading the political weather with a new administration incoming, quietly withdrew those pieces and stopped enforcing them, a tactical retreat to protect the rest of the rule. For about a year, that was the uneasy status quo. The core of the regulation stood. The clock kept ticking toward 2034. And then July of 2026 arrived, and everything changed again. 2 days before this video, the EPA, under the Trump administration, announced it was transmitting California's Harborcraft waiver to Congress, along with a second waiver covering ships at berth in ports. Why does that matter? Because of an obscure law called the Congressional Review Act, which lets Congress vote to nullify federal rules. And if Congress voting to erase a California environmental rule sounds far-fetched, you haven't been paying attention to the last 18 months. In early 2025, the EPA sent Congress 3 of California's biggest vehicle waivers, including the rule requiring all new cars sold in the state to be zero emission by 2035. Congress voted them down. Now it's the boats' turn. So the classic boats might be saved by Washington at the last second. Wild, right? But don't relax yet, because this story is bigger than one regulation. While the emissions war plays out on the coast, a completely different kind of boat crackdown has been sweeping across California's lakes. And this one didn't come from a government agency. It came from a mussel the size of your thumbnail. In October of 2024, biologists made a discovery that sent water managers into a full-blown panic. Golden mussels, and invasive species from Asia were found in the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta. First time ever detected anywhere in North America. These things breed explosively, coat every hard surface they touch, and in South America they've choked the intake pipes of hydroelectric plants and drinking water systems. They travel from lake to lake by hitching rides on boats, in bilge water, in ballast tanks, on trailers, on hulls. So the bans began. Real ones this time. Folsom Lake, up to 70,000 launches a year, banned motorboats outright for 30 days, then required every trailered vessel to pass inspection and sit through a 30-day quarantine sealed with a red tag. Lake Berryessa banned motorboats entirely. New Melanese required 30-day seals with decontamination fees running from $50 to over $200. Santa Clara County went further still, banning boats registered in 10 entire counties, including Los Angeles and San Diego, plus anything registered outside California, from launching at any county reservoir, period. Your zip code is now a boating violation. And here's the detail that made me stop and stare at my screen. In June of 2026, right as summer boating season kicked off, the state ended its inspection and decontamination program at Lake Oroville, one of the largest reservoirs in California. Scientists were stunned. One expert compared it to fighting an epidemic and giving up on the key hubs. No law technically bans classic boats, but between the coastal emissions cliff and the inland muscle lockdowns, the space where they can simply exist is shrinking from both directions at once. Zoom out and you'll see the pattern. The EV mandate, small engine phase-outs, gillnet bans, each one defensible alone. Stacked together, they point straight at boat owners. And to be fair, no, there's no statewide ban on two-stroke engines, whatever you've read online. But the list of places they're unwelcome keeps growing. Because this was never really about boats. It's a preview of what happens when old machines collide with new rules, and who blinks first. Right now, that answer is sitting in Congress. Subscribe, because the second that vote drops, you'll be the first to know.